I love that we have a mix of new filmmakers, old filmmakers, and filmmakers that are just being introduced to the festival. For those that don't fully know what Fusion Fest Film Contest is about, we take filmmakers and we randomly pair them with people that have stories to tell about their heritage, and how they keep that alive here in Florida, how they pass it on to their to other generations. Matter of fact, we have one subject this year that has 3 generations: grandparents, parents, children. But the reason I brought these guys here today is I want everyone to have the safest and most comfortable experience humanly possible. I've been talking to all the subjects this week, asking them to make sure that they feel comfortable in the house with you guys there. Of course, I think shooting outside is probably best in the world of COVID, but I also know that sometimes someone's using a leaf blower down the block, and that's not always feasible. So we have Randy and Aubrey and Craig here to tell us about little tips and tricks and things to do to be compliant with COVID safety procedures, and also just some tips and tricks for sort of guerrilla filmmaking, because you guys only have a day, maybe a day and a half to get this together, and you're going to need every bit of that skill. But before we start questioning you guys, I'd like to introduce Terry Olson, our instigator in charge, that if it weren't for Mr. Olson, Fusion Fest and none of us would be here this evening. So welcome, Terry.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank Randy and Aubrey and Craig and you, Lori, for putting this together. Fusion Fest is a result of the fact that we are a very diverse community, and we think that's exciting. In the world and throughout history, sometimes when people are different from us, it causes fear, and that can lead to hate. And we think that Orlando, as a crossroads of the world with 75 million people and hundreds of heritages represented here, have a chance to show the world that people with different lifestyles, different heritages, ethnicities, etc., can live together in a way that's respectful and on a basis of love as opposed to fear, action as opposed to complaining. So Fusion Fest, this will be the 3rd year of it. Is Thanksgiving weekend coming up in November, and probably will be the first kind of larger scale event happening in Orlando since the beginning of March. Although I would guess the theme parks are an event in themselves every day. So they're happening, but we like to explore all aspects of culture. Food is a big basis of the festival because we all eat, and food is an important part of ceremony in religions and in families and in life. But in addition to that, we explore music and dance and film and stories and fashion and poetry and visual arts. And this year we'll be adding holidays and traditions from around the world. So I'm really delighted that Lori and the Global Peace Film Festival have taken on this program. And again, thankful that Randy and Aubrey and Craig are here to maybe help us some tips and help those who are either competing in the $1,000 prize contest for the MYgration films or just filmmakers in general as we approach this time. So thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Terry. All right, so first question for you guys. You know, I've sat in a lot of Zoom sessions dealing with how, you know, what are some of the best set practices to use during COVID, keeping in mind that they're going to be filming in people's homes and possibly outside. Randy, I'll open it to you first. What do you think is some sage advice for keeping everyone safe?
The one thing we all have problems with: communication. You know, you have to communicate. So that means you have to do a safety meeting. You know, anytime you do a stunt or, you know, any kind of dangerous thing, you always have a safety meeting. But today, in today's climate with COVID, it's just as bad. So you always have to kind of do kind of a safety meeting with the entire crew and anybody who's involved, and just communicate with them what you'd like to see happen on the set. How many people need to be on the set? Only, you know, key people need to be on the set. You know, you got to make sure that you have PPE available for them. Everybody's got to have masks. Everybody has to do social distancing, wash your hands, have sanitizers, all that stuff. But limit the amount of people, you know, that you need around. If they don't need to be there, have them go outside. If you can shoot outside, great. If you can't, you know, limit the amount of people and just practice social distancing. That's really the big thing. But you got to sit down with everybody and talk about it first. That's the start of everything.
Craig, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I agree 100% with what Randy said, and I think it comes down to just a little tighter pre-production, knowing how your day is going to look and knowing how you're going to have crew movements and your talent movements happen at that time. So I think pre-production and spending the time there working on your strategies is time well spent.
Aubrey?
I did a shoot a week and a half ago in Los Angeles, and it was the first shoot that I've done since COVID is a thing. And our kind of overarching approach was just that we had to assume somebody on set was sick. And so if we assume that somebody on set potentially could transmit, what efforts are we going to have in place to make sure that we're as close to a zero transmission environment as possible? And consent is a big part of that. So, I mean, that goes along with communication, but for me, it takes it one step forward that you have to have everybody's agreement that these are the terms under which we're going to show up here today, and that everyone is fully aware of the risks involved. And if it's beyond their risk threshold, then it probably isn't something they should be doing right now.
Yeah, as I talk to the people who the subjects are for the films today, this week, I've been asking if they feel comfortable allowing people in their home wearing masks and whatnot. And so far, everyone has said yes. So, you know, again, all the more reason to be that more mindful of finding your most comfortable mask, because it'll be a long shoot day. Like I've already found ones that like I can't use because when I breathe, they end up in my mouth, you know? So make sure that you're gonna have one that's comfortable that you can wear. Next question, what are, you know, again, these guys are gonna first meet their subjects Friday night and have like 2 hours and the little bit of an advantage in that they'll have a dossier on the subject that they're gonna be filming. What are some techniques for opening people up, getting them to talk about themselves? Craig?
Well, you know, since you said there was a bio that the directors and the crew had on the talent prior to meeting them.
The night that we do the film pairing, as the directors come in, they'll pick a number from 1 to 12, and whatever number they pick is the person they're going to be filming. Mm-hmm. And I have what I call a dossier, and it'll have the person's name, what country they're from, their address, so you'll know where you're going, their email, every way to get a hold of them. And then we had a professional writer write a bio. And then if there's a second location or any notes that I may have from talking with them, hints to help you guys, you know, the filmmakers, make the most of their time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would think the best, you know, the first thing would be the initial introduction, and, you know, to actually either get on the phone, or if everybody's comfortable, do it in person, get your, you know, at least your high keys, your, you know, your director and your producer, and, you know, go spend some time with the person and get a comfort level going. And I think from there, you can figure out which direction, how the thing's going to schedule out just by the information that you get from that meeting right there. So I think the initial contact would be, you know, the most important thing that you could have for that.
Well, when they come into the session on Friday, they will be put in a breakout room like we did yesterday.
Right. And
that's where they'll talk for 2 hours, and then
the
filmmaker can plan accordingly. If it's one location, if it's 2 locations, if it's going to be multi-generational, if it's going to be a 1-day or a 2-day shoot. Mm-hmm. So, Aubrey, any suggestions for getting people to open up? Is there like that one quintessential question that kind of just?
I mean, for me, it's more about having a genuine sense of curiosity. So to not just be so concerned with the list of questions that you might have written out beforehand, but to really listen to the person that you're talking to, and then and when and the things that they're going to say are going to be interesting. And so just to lean into that, to be like, well, tell me more about that turn of events that happened in your life. Because both from an interview standpoint and then also trying to figure out how you're going to tell your story, what piques your interest, your curiosity in a one-on-one conversation is going to be the trail that you're going to want to follow for your storyline.
Good advice. Randy?
I agree. You know, listening and curiosity are two big things. Communicate with the people. A couple of things that you need to realize, first of all, the very first film I worked on was a series of documentaries directed by a guy named Peter Davis, who you guys probably don't know, but Peter won a couple Academy Awards for Hearts and Minds and Selling in the Pentagon, two big documentary films about the Vietnam War. He went on to become like the editor of Esquire magazine for about 20 years. But he taught me a lot about interviewing people. And so it's interesting there. And what he said to me was there are two ways to think about getting to know the person. You know, one is, you know, you get to know, you find common ground with that person. You know, don't ask questions about the subject matter that you're shooting, but find common grounds. Where'd you grow up? Do you have any kids? You know, where are your parents from? What'd your dad do? You know, what type of music do you like? Find common ground, you know, and that opens them up and you get to know them a little bit better. If you follow any of the master classes, there's a great class with Annie Leibovitz who's like, look, my job isn't to put these people at ease and get to know these people. My job is to get the shot that I want. So there are two schools of thought about that you have to kind of think about. I prefer to get to know the people and kind of open it up and ask some generic questions just so I can get to know. If I can find common ground, if you guys grew up in the same area, you both have kids, or, you know, your parents did the same thing, or, you know, you have the same ethnic background, anything, that's common ground. The other big thing is that you have to realize that these people have probably never been in front of a camera before. So a lot of you are beginning filmmakers, but for, you know, a lot of us who do this kind of constantly, we forget about that. And so you have to communicate them what the process is going to be so that they're comfortable with that. You know, it's all kinds of little subtle things that people teach you as you go through this about, you know, when you bring a person into a room, for example, that you're going to do an interview with, you know, have the lights on already, so that they're comfortable with the lights instead of sitting them down, putting a mic on them, and then flipping on all the lights that are bright in their eyes and stuff like that. You want to make them feel as comfortable as possible. And they should be able to feel like it's a conversation between you and them and not asking questions. Of course, the big thing is learn how to ask the right questions. You know, that's a matter of listening to what they're talking about. Don't just have a list of questions and go down the line. Engage them in a story, because that's what this is all about, telling a story. So you want to get them engaged in the story. So continue on with things, you know, ask them follow-up questions about things that they didn't say. I see so many beginning people who are interviewing people, somebody says something really interesting, I'm like, oh, they should ask, and they go right on to the next question. It's like, oh, you missed such a great opportunity there. And that's where those golden nuggets oftentimes come in. So, you know, make sure that you know, obviously don't ask yes and no answers or questions, you know, ask open-ended questions so that they can't say. And so I was always taught, and Peter was the guy who taught me this, was that you need to know the answer to the question before you ask it. You need to know what you want them to say. So a big part of really being a good director is kind of figuring out their story and figuring out what you want them to tell you about that story, and then asking the right questions so that they answer that in the question. So it's kind of a whole big thing that you have to kind of put together when you go in and meet people like this for the first time in a relatively quick amount of time too.
Any other tips? You know, I think people, and you know, after calling these people over the last couple of days, they like to talk about their heritage. It's not going to be a lot to get these people to open up. They're already opening up to me, and I think we have a really, really neat group of people. But, you know, like Randy said, you know, you just, like last year I wanted someone to do it, and they said, Lori, I tried getting in front of a camera. I just couldn't do it. I just dummied up, you know, and that's, you know, hopefully that doesn't happen at all. But based on the people I've talked to, you're not going to have a problem getting them to talk.
Yeah.
Lori, I have a question related to that.
Sure.
I'm wondering if you think the subjects will be more comfortable in front of the camera since their relationship with the filmmaker is going to start via Zoom virtually, or if that will be more awkward because there's an extra technology level.
Well, that's a good question. And I always say that, within a couple questions, the person that you're interviewing should not even be thinking that there's a camera there. If you're doing your job right, they should be engaged in a conversation with you. And so that's where the engagement comes in. But if you're kind of stumbling through and kind of thinking about looking down at your notes and they're talking and you're not looking at them, then and then they stop and you go, that's when they go, oh, there's a camera and there's people and stuff around here. But if you engage them in a conversation, that all becomes secondary and they don't worry about that. And you get a much more organic interview from those people.
Agree. Anyone else? Craig, Aubrey, anything else you want to add to that? Nope.
Randy did a great job.
I have one comment. So being that these pieces are going to be largely dependent on the formal interviews, meaning there's not going to be a lot of scenes or necessarily B-roll to cut in, that like what the interview looks like is of significant importance. And I mean, you could even look at like our images right here, and the only one who made any effort at their background is Mr. Baker. And his shot looks so much better than all of ours, just to have something interesting in the background with a little bit of space. And
if
oftentimes,
I made it asymmetric, it would be better. Asymmetric.
It's beautiful. But like it makes such a difference aesthetically when the background is really intentional and has space to even be able to fall out of focus. And it's a lot of mistakes that I see very frequently is people sitting up against too close to their background, whatever it is, and it becomes a distraction to hearing what people are saying.
Yeah, I just have to say, I teach 100 beginning filmmakers every month. And so I'm seeing all the problems that they have. I do a project a week. And so every week I see all the things. And the number one problem that I have, and my students, when they start hearing me talk about this, they're like, oh no, he's talking about this again. It's backgrounds. People don't realize how important the background is to the shot. And there are people like Joe McNally, who's one of the top still photographers, flash photographers in the world, who jokes about, he chooses his background first, and then he puts the people in front of it. I do the same thing. I find great looking backgrounds. So I can't tell you how important the background is. And so,
denied again today that he had poison in
Sorry.
his system. Back in this country.
Sorry about that, Randy. Randy, you're muted. Randy, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Randy.
so I was,
You got it. There we go.
okay, there you go.
Sorry,
Now can you hear me?
I don't know what happened.
Sorry, I was just talking on and on, and you couldn't hear me. So at what point did you lose me there?
I don't know.
Okay, so I was talking about how important the backgrounds were and how, I teach 100 students a month, and the big problem I see is these backgrounds. And so, people don't understand how important the background is. And what I teach is this: the background is just as important as your focal point, period. You have to think about it that way. I work with a photographer named Joe McNally, who's one of the top flash guys in the world. And he jokes that his background is more important than the person he's shooting. And he always tries to find the background. And I've kind of adapted that over the years, And so when you think about the background, you got to be thinking about the background needs to be doing 4 things in your shot. Should be enhancing the story always. Whatever the story is, your background should help tell you the story. If it's not, you're not taking advantage of that. You're not using everything to your full potential to tell that story visually. Number 2, it should be helping to create depth. And one of the things that I find that the biggest problem I see with beginning students is they shoot with a wall right behind them, or they shoot with a plain background, or they shoot. What your background needs to have is, don't try to shoot any closer than 8 to 12 feet from a background, and your background should have a variance in bright and dark in colors. You don't want a flat lit background, whether it be black or white. You want to, and so here's the thing I'm going to tell you about this. Look at some of the films that have been winners before and go in and screenshot the interview setup, and then pay attention to the background. And you'll find the ones that are really good have a lot of depth in the background, because Your job as a cinematographer is to create three-dimensional depth in a two-dimensional plane. That's everything you're trying to do to make your shot look cinematic, is that you're trying to create three-dimensional depth in a two-dimensional plane. And you use all these things called depth cues to do that, but starting with a deep background that's 8 to 12 feet away, and then having a variance of dark and bright, and then the other big, factor to that is a strong backlight that separates your objects from the background. That helps that. Now, the background should also help balance out the image if it's asymmetrical. So if you look at me, I'm flat to the camera. See, I'm flat to the camera like this. But if I just turn my body this way, I add a little bit more depth to the camera. If I turn my body this way and look at it, now, because I'm asymmetrical, I have a balance something behind me. So I just balanced out my image. When you do asymmetrical shooting like this, you create an unbalanced image. So you have to have something on the opposite side to balance that out. And then the final thing that the background should do is just make your shot more visually interesting. If you do those four things, enhance the story, create depth, balance out the image, and make the background more visually interesting, your shots will look totally different. I mean, totally different. And have a strong backlight on top of that, then you're going to have really great three-dimensional depth in your shot, and your shot's going to look really good. So spend a lot of time in your backgrounds. I couldn't agree with Aubrey any stronger. That's my big get off my soapbox moment. I talk about this all the time.
No, I couldn't agree more. I have students that, like there's lamps coming out of their head and thermostats coming out of their head, and it's like, or, they're like in a messy bed and I can see it. And it's like, seriously? Because like, I'm looking at everything in your room. I'm not even listening to what you're saying. What do you guys think of the idea of throwing the background out of focus for an interview? Aubrey?
I think that can be a great storytelling tool when used intentionally. I think that shallow depth of field is, it's a little overplayed. I would be more interested in seeing details of the background that add to the story, but particularly if there isn't a background available that adds to the story, then to throw it away and draw all the focus to the person's talking can still be an artistic approach.
Craig, any tips for framing people? Or, Randy, you were talking about backlight and this light. I think a lot of our filmmakers aren't going to have any light. I think it's going to be, maybe Craig, you can address using color as separation, if you don't have the light to do it.
Right. I mean, you can play with, with basically just your color temperature of your light sources. Will create a three-dimensional and a lift off from the wall. But, the first light I ever place is a backlight. When I'm lighting on a big set, and then I model from around that and work out my ratios there. So otherwise, as Randy said, you get that very two-dimensional close up. Even at 8 feet, you're still looking glued to that back wall without some form of a separation light, or a backlight that's strong.
And that technique works really well with social distancing too. You have to put your camera further back so that you get that dimension, that depth.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you want to have your camera a little bit away. You want to be able to crush that. You want to crush, your talent there up against the wall, and have the ability to do some drifting and that kind of stuff, which is a much better look, on a tighter lens than putting it right there at a wide open.
For those that may not know, what's a tighter lens?
Pardon me? A tighter lens would be moving in on the mirror. Would be, you would be, you would be magnifying the actual image or the actual person or the subject matter by moving in there. You're allowing you going in tighter on the face.
Right.
Well, Laurie?
Yeah.
For me, just putting this all together, I'm not a filmmaker, but that idea of curiosity and getting to know the person, and about background and lighting, I would think maybe a good first thing if you're going to a subject's home is to ask them to show you around the home. Well, you can be looking at where our lighting, could I have them turn that lamp on? Because you got to work with what you got. So explore and have them tell you about the things on the walls, wherever kind of thing, just as part of getting to know them, while you're also figuring out, if I put them over here or there, that will work.
And that would also give you an opportunity to maybe do some set dressing at the same time and finding highlights and, you know, and beautiful things that you can enhance, you know, the background and foreground if needed.
And I would just, as the head of Fusionfest, encourage everyone just to do all of this with respect. Like, don't just go in and start moving their furniture around, but if you want to, say, would it be okay if we, or even, is it okay if I touch this object?
I haven't sent out you're all representatives of Fusion Fest, so you better behave yourselves email yet. So thank you, Terry.
Yep.
So just a couple of things. I wanted to comment about Aubrey's thing about the depth of field. And for me, it's always about the story. The story drives everything. So whether you have a deep depth of field or a shallow depth of field, it really depends on what the background is and how that fits into the story, number one. Number two, in terms of lighting on this, for most of you, just out of curiosity, how many are going to be shooting with a DSLR or mirrorless camera? Most of you? Okay. What about video cameras? Anybody shooting with real video cameras? Okay, great, Matthew. What about cell phones? Anybody shooting with cell phones? You know, and so here's what I want to say to you. It's not about the gear, it's about the craft. And so you have to understand that. It doesn't matter what you shoot with or what lights you have and stuff. So in terms of lighting, if you don't have lights, then, you know, you should go out there and start looking at do-it-yourself light kits. You know, you can go to Home Depot and stuff and do that. Number two, there are three things you need to think about: ambient light, natural light, and practical light. So those are going to be your friends. If you don't have bounce cards like foam core or something like that, go to Walmart or Target and for $3 buy some white foam core. You know, if you don't have pony clamps, if you don't know what a pony clamp is, this is a pony clamp. You know, go to your local dollar store and buy 2 of those, and then get a light stand or something and clamp the you know, foam core on the side of it, and then put it in for a fill light or a key light or even a backlight. You know, use natural light like a window. You know, put the person next to the window so you're not shooting the window. The other big thing from a technical standpoint that I see that most of you are going to run into but don't know anything about, what's the number one? Anybody have an idea about what the number one thing is you need to be paying attention to when you're creating a background? Dynamic range. Anybody know what that means at all? Okay, so let's talk about this. Dynamic range is the difference between what the camera can see between the darkest and the brightest part of the image. And why is that important? Well, because your eye can see between 20 to 24 stops of dynamic range. The cameras that you're shooting with are probably going to only see about 7 to 8 stops of dynamic range, a third of what the camera can see. So what does that mean for you? That means that you cannot put the camera into a high contrast shooting situation, period. And so you need to know what the dynamic range of the camera is. And I'm telling you that most of them are 7 to 8 stops, even DSLRs, unless you're shooting with like the, you know, the A7 series or the Nikon 7s or anything like that. Then you're bumping up to about 10 stops of dynamic range, which is a big difference. If you're shooting raw or log, you know, with video cameras, then you're going to jump up to about 14 stops of dynamic range. And that's why people like to shoot log, is because they get this stretched tonal range that can help them. But other than that, you know, for most beginning filmmakers, you can't look at a scene and say, oh, I've got 10 stops of dynamic range here, and my camera only has 7 stops of dynamic range. So here's a good rule of thumb for you to use. Try not to have anything behind your focal point, which in most cases is going to be the person that you're shooting, that's brighter than your focal point. And kind of understand the ratios of where that light needs to be. Generally speaking, your background's a half stop to a stop underexposed from your key light. Your backlight may be about a stop or a half stop brighter than your key light, depending on what type of look and mood you're going to have. So if you understand those parameters, try not to have anything behind your focal point that's brighter than your focal point, then you won't get into a situation. I see people all the time trying to shoot with the window behind them. You are never going to do that. If you're shooting outside, you know, make sure if you're shooting under bright daylight, where's the sun go? Behind the person, because if you have it in front of the person, they're going to be squinting. Or if you have it too high, they're going to have raccoon eyes where their eyes are going to be dark. So put the sun directly behind them, lower in the sky, not directly overhead, lower in the sky. Don't have the sun in your shot, and then have a reflector or a bounce card in front of them, above them. Now, the big mistake that I see everybody making outside is they get a reflector, and they've seen all these videos that say, put the reflector down low, and, you know, the sun's coming in from the back, and put the reflector down low, a bounce light up into. That looks great if you're going to do a Boris Karloff horror movie or a sci-fi movie, but light comes in naturally from overhead at a 45-degree angle. Light doesn't come in sideways, and light doesn't come in from below naturally. It comes in at an angle from 45 degrees. So you want that light up, that foam core up there. If it's an overcast, cloudy day, you want the sun in front of them, lighting them through the clouds, and the sun will still be coming through a direction in the clouds. You just need to know what that direction is, have it lower in the sky so it's lighting them up, and then you need something as a backlight, like a reflector, right out of the shot, so that you can put that in there. Now, if you're interviewing somebody and they're asymmetrical like this, where does your backlight go? And where does your key light go for that? So those are things that you have to think about. Your backlight goes on the same side as your focal point. Why is that? Because you're probably not going to have a boom arm, which means that you can bring that backlight in over the back of the light and use it as a backlight. So you want to get that light stand right out of the shot, which would be over on this side, over here on this side, so that when I'm turned slightly into the thing, that backlight can be right out of the shot and lighting me up. And that way I have my key light coming across on my short side. Do you guys know what short side and broad side means in terms of lighting? So if I'm looking across the camera, and if you're doing interviews, you need to know where people look across the camera. So this side of my face has more real estate facing the camera. This side has less, right? So generally speaking, for more dramatic looking shots, you want your key light to come from the short side of the face over here, coming in over here. So it throws the shadow on the broad side of the face, which makes it look more dynamic instead of having a big
took
bright
me
light.
about 40 years back to my first film school, Randy.
That's what it's all about. If you understand
No shadow.
the basic
No
concepts
shadow.
it's all about the nose shadow, where the nose falls on the face. And there's really only 4 basic lighting styles that you need to know: Paramount, Loop, Split, and Rembrandt, for how to light a face. And if you understand those basic concepts, you can do that with any light source. It doesn't, 3-point lighting is a theory. It doesn't mean 3 lights. It means 3 different kind of light sources you can use. Sorry, I'm going into my teaching mode again.
Yeah, you couldn't tell, Randy. But you guys bring up some good things. Let's talk about audio. Someone had mentioned it briefly. Again, due to COVID, I think most people might feel more comfortable shooting the interview outside. And, certainly if they live near an airport like I do, or there's someone blowing leaves down the block, you can't. But if it's just a windy day, like, what are some tips and tricks to get good audio? Because it's something that everyone throws out the window. And especially we're going to have a lot of people with foreign accents, so what's a good way to get the best audio possible? Aubrey?
This is not my expertise.
Okay.
I have some general the obvious suggestions are to just try to be in the most quiet place possible, and to get the mic, whatever mic you're using, whether it be a boom mic or a lav mic, to get it as close to their face, as close to their mouth as possible, and to have somebody, if at all possible, listening to the sound while you're recording, to make sure that you are capturing it at an optimum level. But I usually hire someone to handle that for me.
Craig, any tips on sound?
I agree with hiring someone to handle that for me. The majority of it, I'm a big fan of using a boom, using a lavalier, trying to, mix these to get the best sound available. If we can record them on separate tracks, even better. I find that having one can put you have no fix. You have a bad audio, you have a ruffle, you have a sound that's caused from against the mic, or a rattle that's, actually happens in the boom sometime, having the Murgatroyd. Having a backup at that time is always a great thing. Now, they sound different. To cut from one to the other in a sentence will never work, because each microphone has a different tenure to it. But having the ability to have 2, I think, is a great thing. And so I've been doing that a lot. And we've even done that with just one mixer too. So we're mixing 2 into 1 source, and that's been working fine too.
Randy?
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big I'm a big two mic fan. You have to understand the reason why you use two mics. The lav mic gives you the chest resonance. So you're picking up this bass resonance from the chest, which sounds more natural to you. The shotgun mic gives you more of a straight on presence. And so it gives you a little bit more distance. And when you mix those, it just is a natural form of audio that you hear. Now, in terms of how far the mic should be away, this is the rule. If you understand this, this is the rule. Mic is that far away. When you're doing the shotgun mic, about the same way. When you have a shotgun mic overhead, it's pointing at the heart. When you have a shotgun mic below, it's pointing at the forehead. You want the audio to be captured out here because your sound's coming out of your mouth. The lav mic, and again, it's really up to you whether you hide the mic or whether you show the mic. For these types of interviews, I don't think it's that big a deal to show the mic, but you want it far away. You have to be careful if you're using both mics that you don't get a phasing where it phases the mic out, but the mics today are so much powerful. Now, the other thing to think about when you're doing audio is when you do the location scout, listen for audio. You should be listening for audio. And so what you're going to find is if you're going outdoors, you got to think about cicadas this time of year. You got to think about traffic. You got to think about trains. You got to think about lawnmowers and leaf blowers and stuff like that. If you're inside, you got to be thinking about, crying babies and air conditioning and loud refrigerators and things like that. So just use your ear when you go out there and do it. And then you have to think about things like, are you going to want the questions that you're being recorded? How, if it's a single person, don't use a camera mic. Camera mics suck. Get the mic as close as you can within, those limits. And then, if you want to have you want to be able to have the interview people hear the questions. So if you can pick that up on the live and the shotgun mic, which you should be able to, that's great. Just make sure that, again, my big tip is have somebody listening to audio. Without audio, you got a slideshow. So just understand that you have to have audio. Yeah, it has to be good.
I have something to add. I should have started with this, but whatever you do, don't use the mic on the camera. And Randy said this, but to bring extra attention to it, there are things you can buy and return on Amazon that you can plug into any device to give you a mic that you can take and put close to your subject, if that's what you need to do. But it will make such a negative impact to be only listening to the camera mic that it will be a big disappointment. And so it's absolutely worth going out of your way, even if you're shooting on your iPhone, which can capture beautiful footage, to get an external mic.
I actually bought a little lavalier wired 20-foot, 3.5-inch mini plug with a clip on it for, what was it, $9 or something like that from Amazon, during our lockdown, because I was playing with the kids and that kind of stuff. So no less, actually great sound for a $9 investment. They had a nice, natural, rounded sound to them. So that's a great thing, a great thing that's there, that's affordable, that can be picked up.
Is you don't need to spend a lot of money on the technology if you spend the time to get to think about what you're doing and put the time in there and do it properly. We have some questions from the people. Do you think subjects will be more comfortable in front of the camera since the filmmaker relationship will start via Zoom, or more awkward because of the technology? I guess we're going to find out. I think would really be the answer to that.
And it can only help. I think the more time you spend, speaking with and seeing, your subject and the subject seeing, their filmmakers, just leads to a more natural relationship.
And I think just, it goes back to being curious, as a producer of many years, I've had to build relationships via phone calls with companies all over the United States. And by the time they show up in Orlando, I am their best buddy. We're sisters, we're brothers, we're whatever. And, and then they leave and I never talk to them again. But it truly is an art form and will behoove you in life in general to get to know how, and Craig, you're great at this. I love being in conversations with Craig because he is so curious and ask people questions. It's something I learned from you early on when I met you, Craig. Craig and I have known each other for like ever.
Right.
But Craig is a great listener.
But Lori, don't be sad when the clients leave, because you know there'll be new ones next week.
I know. It does make you a little sad, though.
Oh, of course it does. Of course it does.
Does the size of the filming setup play a part in an interviewer's comfort level? What do you think?
Sure, it does. Yeah, it does. And so just to go back for a second, you know, it's about creating an intimate conversation. That's what you're trying to do. You just have to realize that it should be like just a conversation between the two people. So when I start out with somebody, especially if I don't know somebody, I always say the same thing to them. Look, my job is to make you look as good as possible on the camera. So you should not worry about how you look or what this is going to look like. My job is only to make you look good. I will never do anything that will make you look bad. And so that gives them a level of comfort right away. Okay, this guy's, you know, got my best interest in mind. So that's a big part of it. And then, you know, try not to keep a lot of people around, you know, the set, because it's distracting, you know, and so you don't want to be distracted when you're in an interview. Again, it should be like more of an intimate conversation, like the camera wasn't there and you're just having this conversation with this person. That's where you get really more genuine stuff out of the people.
Do you find it's better if they look at the camera? I've often noticed, like, I had a friend that used to do ENG stuff, and, you know, she's the interviewer that you never see, that they're kind of looking off camera at. Which do you guys prefer, them looking at the camera or just like looking slightly off?
That's very easy. If you're looking at the camera, you're addressing the audience.
Right.
If you're looking off axis of the camera, you're talking to interviewer. So if anytime you've got somebody interviewing you, unless it's something that they're talking directly to the audience about, subjective versus objective, basically, you want them to look off the camera, and they should be looking across the lens. And, you know, you want the interviewer pretty close to the other side of the lens. So if, you know, if this was a lens here and I had the, you know, the interviewer would be right here if the person was on that side. If they were on that side, the interviewer would be here. And so, you know, it's a natural feel. And, you know, I've done thousands of interviews for all kinds of different television networks. Everybody had their different little versions of that, but that's pretty much the standard. If you're looking into the camera and talking to the camera, you're addressing the audience. And that's why you see sometimes, you know, if somebody's interviewing somebody and they're talking to them, and then the person has a really strong statement that they want to say to somebody specifically, they turn and look into the camera and talk to that person specifically. So.
With social distancing and getting creative in tight spaces, do you have any tips for how to stay safe while getting interesting, unique, and intimate moment shots, especially when there are not preset up, more so for B-roll? Can I just make a suggestion? Because someone said earlier about like going and checking out their house. I think you said that, Terry. Be filming that. You know, it's like, I did a documentary a little while ago about this 106-year-old woman who still played the mighty Wurlitzer. And the best footage we got that day was, I told one of my students, I was like, just put the camera at your hip and just follow her. Just follow her. Just whatever she does, get it on camera. So the minute you get there, just start shooting, because it'll just give you more to edit with. Because you never know.
Sorry. I just wanted to say something about B-roll, and I used the term actually myself a little bit earlier because it's so commonplace, but I actually hate the use of the word B-roll and its place in documentary, because it's really a journalism term. So B-roll for me, I mean, it means a lot. You know, it brings to mind what it is. But when I'm working with students, what I tell them is that I don't want you to go out and shoot B-roll. I want you to go out and shoot scenes. So if you are in an environment, it's way more interesting for us to watch something unfold, as simple as it is, than it is to be standalone singular shots of objects or of people passing by. So when I work with students, we don't use the word B-roll. Why would we go out with intention to shoot something that's secondary? We want to go out and shoot something that is interesting to watch. So instead of using the word B-roll, the words we use is we think about as scenes. We have interviews, and then we have scenes. Just because they're scenes of real life doesn't make them any less scenes. And in terms of the comment about social distancing, like, you don't need to get within 6 feet of anybody to capture a scene. So I mean, 6 feet is pretty intimate when you have a camera in front of you. So you should be pretty fine.
Yeah. So just a word about B-roll. I feel the same way. You know, if you go out and shoot single shots, you know, and so if you do your interview and they're talking about different things and they have shots, you know, they were talking about a photo or something that you need to get a shot of. Okay. So you have to tell a story. If you shoot one shot of that, that's not a story. If you talk to any editor, and this is the thing that you have to realize, and there's, you know, I was taught early on, you shoot to edit. You shoot to edit. So everything you do is about editing. So you always need to be thinking about editing. If you don't know who Lev Kuleshov is the Soviet filmmaker who did the Kuleshov effect, where they determined that, you know, what came before and what came after the shot that you shot determined how the audience perceived that shot. It was a greater kind of a meaning to it. And so you have to think about what you're shooting before and after. And if you talk to most editors, they're going to say, if you're going to tell a story, you got to have 3 shots. You got to have a wide enough shot so that you tell where you're at and what's going on and who's in the shot. You got to have a shot about, you know, what that person is doing or looking at or who they're talking to. And then you got to have a reaction shot about how they're feeling about what they're looking at or talking to. So you got 3 shots: a wide shot, medium shot, close up. Now, it doesn't have to be a wide shot, medium shot, close up. Could be a medium shot, medium close up, but you have to have 3 shots. And in between each of those shots, you need to change the camera angle by about 30 degrees and need to change the focal length by about 20 millimeter. And then when you get into edit, those 3 shots will edit together very smoothly. And instead of having just one shot, you have somebody, instead of just showing the picture, you have the person with the picture in the hand, and then you cut to over the shoulder shot of the picture, and then you cut to the reaction going, oh, on a close up where you can see the emotion in their face. That tells a story. That's a scene. You know, so it's not just a single shot. Stop thinking about things like that. You have to think about it in terms of telling the story with at least 3 shots. That's so important, by the way, that the BBC teaches all their reporters a 5-shot technique. The one shot is it's the establishing shot. It's the shot of what they're looking at. It's the reaction shot. There's an interesting shot like a low angle or a high angle, and they always throw in there like over the shoulder. But they actually train their journalists, their video journalists, to actually shoot that way.
Now, all that is true, but also at the same time, I've worked on numerous low-budget movies where grabbing the camera in between setups, people shooting B-rolls have actually saved those scenes, saved that location till we moved on. So there's you have to somehow have a little bit of that while you're, in balance, while you're just shooting your script. So ultimately, to edit, you want to give, you do want to shoot the edit, but you also want to give the editor options. So, that's it's a fine line. And if you have the ability to do that, if you're, you have someone on your crew that can beetle around and take various shots while you're moving outside or moving to the next location. As I said, the more footage you have in your day and a half or 2 days you get to shoot, the longer your project's going to have on screen time anyway. So.
And don't forget about things like time lapse or slow-mo footage, So if you're shooting your interviews and stuff and you got a cell phone, set it up on a tripod and get time lapse of the house with the clouds going in front of it and stuff. Great footage that increases your production value a great deal. And then if you have, most cell phones these days will do slow-mo, get some nice slow-mo shots that you can cut in there as well. And that gives you, again, it just is adding a little bit more production quality to your shots that people are looking for.
Right.
And I also ask all the people to, if they can provide our filmmakers with digital assets, like last year, someone had home movies from, their home country when they were little. And, it just adds interest to the story, so that they are aware that they have to provide some of that for the filmmakers as well. Randy, last year you talked about eyeline matches. Can you address that?
Well, if you're doing scenes, or if you're doing, there's a couple different ways. If you're doing scenes, or you're doing an interview where you're cutting back and forth from an interviewer to an interviewee, you have to use what's called the 180-degree rule. And the 180-degree rule is just a visual reference where you want to change the camera angle. One person is looking this way and the other person is looking this way. So if you draw a line between those two people and then a 180-degree circle in the front of that, your camera can be anywhere within that 180 degrees, crossing each other to get that eye line match. So that's one type of eye line match. The other type of eye line match is actually where the eyes go within the frame. And so most people don't understand this, that, you know, if you look at most films, there's a zone about a third of the way down from the top of the frame. If you want to get really technical, it's based on the diagonal method of composition and the phi grid. In between the rule of thirds grid, the little small zone, and the eyes usually go in the zone. And it's based on how much headroom you have, the space between the top of the head and the top of the frame, and where those eyes go about a third of the way down from the top of the frame. And then also you got to consider lead room. You know, basically lead room is, I think it's called the rule of space, but it's thought about as an anticipatory space. It just looks more natural for you to have a little bit more space in front of the person in the direction that they're looking, walking, or leading. It's called nose room, look room, lead room, you know, depending on what you're shooting, then behind. General rule is 1/3 behind, 2/3 in front. And so if you keep all those things in mind when you're shooting your shots, the framing of it, where it's cut on the human body, you know, the focal length that you're shooting at, where the eye line goes, where the headroom goes, how much lead room you have, you know, that all makes sense. But what you don't want to get into the habit of doing is if you're shooting an interview with somebody and they're looking across the camera this way, and then you cut back to the other interviewer and the interviewer is looking the same direction, it just looks weird. So if the interviewee is looking this way, when you cut to the interviewer, he should be looking this way. So when you cut those two things together, it looks more natural.
It's like they're looking at each other, even though they could possibly be in two completely different environments.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see. There's a. So what? You know, let's just talk guerrilla filmmaking a second, because, you know, we talked about B-roll, purpose, you know, getting as much as you can. If you had to give like one tip, like for guerrilla filmmaking, I mean, again, these people are going to meet on Friday night for a couple of hours and then hit the ground running Saturday, go, possibly shoot. What's the biggest tip you could give that, like, well, I'll tell you one tip I could give is make sure your batteries are charged, because I have become the most guilty person at not. I'm always the photographer at the school event who didn't charge her freaking battery, you know. So that would be my tip personally. But Craig, any like takeaway that you can give us that?
I was really excited this week when on Amazon, I think it's eMart or something like that, actually came out with a AC plugged LED light, little portable unit, a 60 bulb thing. They're $30 for two. Come on a little stand and all that kind of stuff. So I thought that was a great, you know, deal to have. Always have a ladder. So a ladder can help you get to the ceiling. You can lean things against it. You can use one of Randy's pony clamps and clamp your bounce against that if you don't have any stands to raise stuff on, you know. So that kind, you know, that type of stuff. Instead of using, you know, if you're using LED lights, don't have to go buy any expensive 216 or any type of diffusion put on the front. I've been using, again, when we were in lockdown shooting stuff, I was using parchment paper. I was also baking bread, so we had some in the house. Throws out an absolutely beautiful little bit of gold tinge to it, but it's an absolutely beautiful soft light. And it's heat resistant too, you know, 400 degrees or something like that. So that's, you know, that's another great thing. Always have some clothespins around. And in your location, if you have a chance just to try to keep a little social distancing going, you know, there's nothing wrong with having an indoor and an outdoor. Be it the front door, you can come in with your gear, but when you're done with your mission, run out the back door, come around the house, bring your talent in the front, everyone can go out the back, or vice versa, whatever works best. But we're not going to end up with people bottlenecking, trying to get in and out at the same time, or stuck in a hallway with each other. You know, it's okay to create a flow within the environment that you're shooting in. not a guerrilla trip, but I think it's a pretty
Yeah,
good
no, that's a
trip.
great point. Absolutely, in this day and age. Aubrey, what's like the one big thing that you like learned that was like, wow, that just was you don't need a lot of money. You can do it really simply.
Put the camera on a tripod. Or any kind of stabilizing rig. Trying to shoot handheld, unless you're very practiced at it, generally ends badly.
Good point. Randy, how about you?
Thank you, Aubrey. I made my living as a handheld camera guy for a number of years, and I was really good at it, and I had all kinds of rigs and stuff, but I had so many arguments with producers about put the damn tripod on the camera on a tripod, and then make sure the tripod is level. Don't shoot crooked shots. That's the other big thing I see with beginning filmmakers. Scott Kelby, who owns Kelby One, which is kind of the lynda.com of photography, says it better. Nothing says amateur photographer like a crooked shot. So that's number one. Number two, when you're shooting interviews, make sure you have a catch light in the eye. If you don't have a catch light in the eye, that's a little specular highlight in the eye, then the eye looks dead. And that's great if you're shooting vampires or zombies, but not interviews with people.
Nowadays,
so you have a catch light in the eye.
They have, like, for iPhones, they have ring light rigs.
Yeah, here's a little, $40 LumaCube light that's bicolor and stuff that you can mount right on your camera. And you don't, again, when you're talking about lights on the camera, in the old days, I'm an old film guy, Craig would know this, in the old areas, they used to use these things called OB lights, which was just this little light that just fit over the lens. And all it did was give the talent a catch light. It wasn't really bright enough to do a whole lot on the face. It filled in a little bit, but it just gave the talent a catch light. So just put one of these lights on the front of your camera and then dial it down really low, and you automatically have a catch light in the eye. It's just really magical. The best guerrilla filmmaking tip I can give you came from a guy who said it 100 years ago, Ansel Adams, 1920. He said, the most important part of a camera is 12 inches behind it. And so you have to realize that it's not about the gear, it's all about the craft. So you have to do the pre-production about it. His other favorite quote that kind of fits in with this is, there's nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept. So you have to think about what you're shooting before you shoot it. You got to know what you're shooting. And then, I always say the big difference between amateurs and professional filmmakers is this. Professional filmmakers know what they're going to shoot, when they're going to shoot it, why they're going to shoot it, how they're going to shoot it, what they're going to need to shoot it before they pick up the camera. Amateurs pick up the camera, go out there, set up the camera and everything, and then try to figure all that out while they're there. That never works. That's not how this works. That's not how this works at all. So you have to do the pre-production. It's all about doing the pre-production, knowing what you want before you go in there and do the interview. That's the hard part, my friends. That's why not everybody is a great filmmaker or digital storyteller.
Well, and I think that in this age of COVID, I think the whole digital realm has made us a little lazy in some realms, where it's like, oh, we don't have to buy film, we don't have to process film, so let's just keep shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting. And that's not storytelling. It's like you have to go in with the purpose. Every scene you watch has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's about good storytelling. And visual story, it's the economy of the, we've often heard a picture says 1,000 words. What we can tell with images in a very brief time, make your images count. There should never be an image that is just a throwaway that you just put in there because you needed to fill space. It should always tell you something and advance the story and take you deeper into it. And, again, this is a big challenge. You guys have a day and a half at most to film. So start thinking now, and then when you meet your people, I got to tell you, I think it really comes together from my past experience when you guys, the people who are in this year's contest meet their person, because it's just magic. Everyone's like just so up for it, and just like that anticipation. Terry, you were there last year. It was amazing. I'm really trying hard to recreate that this year in the virtual world. Omar is the filmmaker who won the award, the prize last year. Omar, any tips or tricks that you found that worked for you?
Hey, how's it going? Thank you. Tips or tricks? I think what worked best for me was the fact that I plan everything out in advance with the only variable being like who is like what's my character do, right? But like in terms of story, in terms of like what times I would shoot what hours I had reserved for like b-roll, how I will conduct the interview, and even like lighting patterns. Like I said, I had a director of photography, and we sat down like a week ahead just to kind of go over like, okay, if it's a big studio we will do this, if it's a small room we will do that, right? If it's a painter, if it's a musician, if it's a dancer, like we gave ourselves a couple of options. So when we happened to meet Patrick, and he was a painter with a studio, it just worked out. You know, we were ready for it, and I think that's what it was. I literally made myself my whole schedule. I pre-produced the whole film, and I just left blank the things I would find out the night before, and then the whole night I just spent filling in those empty spaces.
Well, that's fantastic advice. Thank you, Omar. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Is anyone else that has done this before? Jennifer, Laura, Lamont, Harley, anything you guys want to add that can help our filmmakers? Jennifer, anything? You good?
I'd be interested in what surprised anyone who was doing it last year, or what you learned in hindsight.
And Laura, I took your advice, so I am calling everyone this week to fill them in. But no matter how much you try to warn people what it's about, they still just don't get it.
Well, I appreciate that though.
I did that last year too, so it's the same.
Let's hope for the best. Everybody motivated and available. That would be nice.
Jennifer, is that Ann?
And Anna's here. Yep.
Hi, Ann. Jennifer and Ann were our mother and daughter filmmakers last year, which I love.
But we didn't shoot together.
No, we didn't shoot together. No, I love that though. I love that.
But
I
think
share about your experience last year.
I think for me, it was my subject matter had a really, really strong accent, really strong, and he talked really fast. And so when it came to editing, and you don't have a lot of time to edit, and you've got all this footage, and it's like I had one big long run-on sentence, and I had to try and figure that out. At the end, his story was fascinating. So it's like you get so much information. It's like, how are you going to cut it down and make it fit and make it all make sense? And then having the accent on top of that. And so, thankfully I was able to put in, because I didn't want anything to be lost. So I wanted to make sure that I was thankful that we could put captions in. And it kind of ruins it a little bit, because you really don't want to have to, rely on captions. But I didn't want any of his information to be lost in the storytelling. But I think when you sit down and you've got all this footage, and now you've got to figure out how to compose the story. I love how Omar said that you just, in your mind's eye, it's like, what is the most important thing? You like figure out the top three things that you really need to make sure it's included in the piece, and then fill it in with extra things. And it was a huge wake up call for me to do it all so quickly, because normally you have a lot more time to think about it, and it really has set the pattern for what I've done since then till what I've done now, because I just completed shooting my third documentary, and I'm working on 2 more.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so and I've learned so much, and I'm so incredibly thankful for this process. And yeah.
Anna, anything?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about how my subject was very camera shy, and was because it was her English is her second language, speaking it, and she was so nervous to have that as her representation, as her English and everything. And so I think a big lesson for me was really like respecting her as a human being, and then also finding other ways to get creative about telling her story. So there was times when she was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't even be on camera. And I was like, what am I going to do if my subject doesn't want to be on camera, So getting creative in other ways to also tell her story. As for her, she was an artist. So I was like, well, if I can get her doing something that she's more comfortable in, then I can capture her that way. And, you know, so I think that was a good lesson for me was just, yeah, getting creative because of like understanding that this person is really opening up, you know, themselves, and especially in a second language, they might be even more, maybe even more difficult for them, you know.
Well, there was one of the subjects from last year that when the night we did the audience award and we did the Q&A, she had like a catharsis. It was very, very touching. I mean, she like actually like resolved an issue that had been with her since she moved to America. I was so moved by it.
Mm-hmm.
Craig, you look like you wanted to say something. You're
muted.
Muted.
Okay. Anyone else? Randy, Aubrey, Craig, any final words of wisdom to impart on our wonderful filmmakers?
Don't forget to have fun.
something.
Randy said, don't forget to have fun. Craig? You're
Craig's
muted.
muted. You're muted.
Muted.
There you go.
Just how, you know, the target on this, you know, is a finished thing. It's not easy to do, but yet, you know, look at the support, you know, that everybody gets. It's, you know, it's almost like the fashion, you know, the Fusionfest family now coming back. And I think that's a really big thing. And, you know, and I wish everyone that, you know, on the journey to finish your piece, I wish everyone the best.
And
Aubrey?
I think Lamont had something to say too.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lamont. You want to unmute yourself?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, just for advice, that last year when I did it, it was super fun, but I had a subject that like really wanted to give me a whole lot, and it was kind of overwhelming. So my only advice was gonna be to like kind of like what the guy earlier said, to just kind of stick with your plan that you have in pre-production, because I found myself with that one day to edit, like literally combing through almost like 7 hours of footage because she just had so much she wanted to give me. So like made the process really long. So my advice was just gonna be to just kind of have a plan to stick to it, and you might get a whole bunch of information, you might get some gems, but kind of like stick to your overall plan, especially with the time frame that we have.
Well, I think the good rule of thumb in filmmaking general is to go in with a plan, but be prepared for anything that might go wrong or anything that might, you know, what we love to call happy accidents. You know, moments present themselves where someone tears up or chokes up, and, you know, a mother realizes that she passed her heritage on to her daughter. And, you know, these are going to be beautiful moments, and they're going to be moments that I think you'll remember. I know that a lot of our people last year had life-changing experiences, and I found that incredibly wonderful and honored to be a part of this whole thing. So thank you all for coming tonight. This session is being recorded. We will be posting this on the Fusionfest film page for filmmakers that could not attend this evening. And thank you all. Craig, Aubrey, Randy, I can't thank you enough. You're fantastic. Thank you. And you too, Terry.
It was worth it just to see Craig's face again.
Yes, it is, Randy.
It's been too long, Craig.
Yeah, it has. And Lori, I mean, all the work again you're going to do this year, you know, congratulations. It's such a good thing.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, at least for me, you know, my heart, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
As the tight timeline was mentioned a couple times, and I hope everyone knows that this year we're adding 3 more days for editing. So there's more.
I actually am hoping someone gets daring enough to do something with animation. I realize animation's like a lot of work, but I hope someone, I don't know, it's just a fantasy. I don't know why.
But I want to also thank all the folks that came in to listen in, and those that are participating. You add a lot to the festival with the stories, because this festival is all about stories. Every one of the 1.3 million people in Orange County have some story. And as we dig them out and listen to each other, we become more of a community together, and that's our goal. So thank you.
Aubrey, last call.
Really, I'm going to close it out. I guess the only thing that I have to say is that the more intentional that you can be with everything that you do, the better the outcome will be, because it'll be shown. Whatever you don't have intention around essentially becomes surveillance footage, and nobody wants to watch a movie about surveillance footage.
Good point. Well, thank you all for showing up tonight. I can't wait to see this year's films, and thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night.
Happy trails.
See some of you on Friday. Good night.